now I can sit and go away. The LGBTQ agenda is about changing our perception of reality. It is about changing everything that we have held to be true and changing what we know to be true to be a lie. And those who speak the truth are then the wrong fellows, and those who speak the lie are the correct fellows. So it's a good background to start with. Now, the theme for my talk is John 14:17. I'll share these slides so that you don't struggle writing too many things. If you could write your questions, it will be useful. And our Lord is saying that he will send us the Spirit of truth. And he tells us the world cannot receive him because it neither sees him nor knows him. But you do know him, and he abides with you and will be in you. It is about the truth, the Spirit of the truth that is in every child of God that we must always protect. Now, we'll go through 4 parts very quickly. We need to understand sexuality from a Christian perspective. So parents, forgive me, I'll use some strong words. There is no way of discussing sexuality without discussing some of these things. We'll understand the sexual revolution and the sex industry. And then we'll spend some time understanding the LGBTQ conditions. And then we'll look at what Christians can do about it using the Drawing a Line campaign. So, are you all familiar with that? What is that? It's a heart. Is it just a heart? It's a love heart, right? That's what the world portrays as love. And the thing about it is that it depicts emotional love. It depicts what I feel when I see something exciting. And the trouble with that heart is that it can change. I can actually stop feeling how I was feeling for you. So you can be emotionally attracted to somebody today, and tomorrow you're not. So it can change. But is this the love that we talk about in the Christian sense? Is emotional love the love that we speak about when we talk about love as Christians? You guys don't know. Is emotional love, when we're told to love God and to love one another, is it in focus? Is it in relationship to emotional love? That is a true image of love. That God created us perfect. He gave us the freedom to make choice, and we made the wrong choices. And we turned our back from him. And we were sent away from the garden. But instead of giving up on us, he actually sent us a rescue plan. He sent his son to die on the cross for our sins so that we may be redeemed. And it is important to understand that Jesus Christ depicts the love of Christ, the love of God, by agreeing to die on the cross for sins he did not commit. But the other message of the cross that we usually don't speak about is that Jesus died for speaking the truth to a world that would not want to listen to the truth. And the other thing is that he accepted the death. He was courageous enough to take the punishment of the world. And finally, that he was exalted by God for standing for the truth. Those are lessons of the cross that we must keep at the back of our mind. Now, rules are rules to restrict us or are rules to give us freedom? What do rules do? Do they give you freedom or do they restrict you? They restrict you. And some, are there any who say they give us freedom? Now, if I told you you can't do anything unless you ask for permission, are you free? Are you free? You are not free because you have to ask for permission, right? What if I said you could do anything you want without asking for permission? Are you free? Are you? How would you be able to make a choice if you have no options? If you're not restricted, you can do anything. You also are not free. Because for you to be truly free, I must tell you what you can and what you cannot do, and then allow you to make your choices. Does that make sense? So rules are not to restrict us, rules are to give us freedom. So when we say we'll drive on the left side of the road, we give our country order, but there are few people who will break the law, isn't it? And they give us this order. So some people have agreed to live by the rules, to be guided by the rules, and a few people have rejected the rules. Now, what is written here, because it's not very clear, down here, that thing that looks like a fence is written God's commandments. And the fellow jumping over the fence is saying, I hate being confined by this fence, I'm jumping over it. And his friend is saying, wait, no, it's not a fence. Look at what happened to this good man. It was actually not a fence, it was a guardrail. He was telling him there is something beyond there that is not safe. But he chose to ignore it. And that is what happens to most of us. If you do not understand the commandments from a perspective of guidance from a loving Father, then you're likely to revolt against them and make the wrong choices, okay? So, some scripture references as we go to human reproduction and family health. So God made male and female. We are created by God. We have dignity that is God-given. And we are created male, female. And then he gave us the sacrament or of matrimony, that we get married to one another to start families. Then in Ephesians, we are told to submit to one another out of reverence to Christ in relation to the family structure. And then in Exodus, we are told, do not commit adultery. And in Exodus 12 again, we are told to honor your father and your mother. So, honor your father and your mother means that they are your priests, and they are the ones who are your prophets. They are the ones who are to guide you, that they would be the first place you go for advice before you go to anyone else. Because they are the only ones who truly love you to a point where they will tell you the truth. And that's where honoring father and mother comes from. So, let us look at sexual intercourse and sex disorders. So, adultery can then be defined as sexual intercourse between a married person and one who isn't their spouse. Is that accurate? So one person is married, the other one is not. So sexual intercourse between a married person and one who is not. So let's then define what sexual intercourse is. Sexual intercourse is the delivery system of the male seed into the female, and it has two purposes that are God-given, that is pleasure and pregnancy. So the couple that experience this have a loving relationship. They share something that is so intimate that they don't share with anyone else, and that gives them what we call unity. It is uniting to the couple. And then it also gives us children, okay? Now, it's very important we understand this, because it is our tool for reproduction, isn't it? In animals, what do we call it? It's called mating. Mumesahau? Aya. It's called mating. Any sex that is outside of marriage then is illicit according to our faith. True? Now that would include adultery, fornication, incest, prostitution, any of those, then you're saying the two are not married. Okay? In incest, if the culture doesn't allow you to marry your sister, then of course you cannot have a relationship with her in the same manner. Now, the other thing is that non-consensual sexual intercourse is also illicit. So it is possible to have rape even in marriage. That your partner must be willing. Therefore, when you look at that, then we see that rape and defilement is illicit. True? Now, what is defilement? It's sex with a minor, isn't it? In this country, below the age of 18, you're not even allowed to have sex. It is illegal. And any such sex then is called defilement. And the problem is because the person consenting to the sex is not considered mature enough to give that permission. Okay? Now, sexual experience that is not sexual intercourse is also illicit. So if the organs are not correct, then it is also illicit. Does that make sense? So masturbation, and masturbation can be self, it can be oral, it can be anal, it can be with an animal, it doesn't matter. It is illicit, isn't it? Because the organs are not going into the right ones, unless you have misunderstood your biology. Are we together? Yes. So in self-masturbation, then you're having a sexual experience alone. And where is your seed going? Into the dustbin or whatever it is. Eh? Yes? So all those, oral sex, anal sex is also just a complicated form of masturbation. A man who is having sex with another man through the back passage, that man is functioning normally as a man, but he is abusing the rectum of the other. Is that clear? We are speaking the truth. I'm sorry for those of you who are looking down. We need to speak the truth. Okay? Okay. Now, sex was designed to be performed. So watching sex is also illicit. All right? So pornography is also illicit. You are not to watch sex. In fact, the best sex teacher is your partner, is your spouse. When you get married, all you need to know is which organ goes where, isn't it? Okay. All right. We have finished our understanding of both faith and biology in as far as reproduction is concerned. Let us quickly look at the sexual revolution. Now, the sexual industry, I'll describe to you a little, and the sexual revolution and the LGBT agenda. But the saddest thing about this relationship is that they have hijacked mental illness and used it for profiteering. And I hope at the end of this discussion it will become clear. Now, you cannot understand the LGBTQ agenda. So let me make this clear. There is the person who is experiencing difficulties, knowing who they are or who to relate with. And then there is a community that has come together and called itself the LGBTQ community. And they are organized, they are funded, they have staff, and they have an agenda. Okay? So differentiate the two. The agenda is different from the people who are suffering. And we shall see how that becomes different. Now, there is a fellow called Wahome. He was born in 1897. I want you to see how far back the problem starts. He died in 1957. And Wahome was influenced by the philosophy of a fellow called Marquis de Sade. Marquis was born in 1740 and died in 1814. Marquis de Sade was a sexual pervert. Marquis did everything his imagination could do in as far as sex is concerned. In fact, he's the one who he started the abuse of women by tying them to a bed while naked and whipping them with a whip as part of his preparation before he could do what he wanted to do. So sadism actually comes from his name. It's called Marquis de Sade. This guy was so deranged that Napoleon, who was the emperor in France, actually kept him in jail or in exile for half his life because of how radical he was about his sexual thoughts. It is Marquis de Sade who wrote the first pornography book and published pornography. And Wilhelm Reich, who came after him, then wrote a book that was called The Sexual Revolution. And in this book, he described several things. He gave it a philosophy, okay? And the philosophy, one was that scientism, belief in science as the only answer to everything that you have, meaning there is no God, you only need to understand the science. The age of reason, or what was called enlightenment, then became the principal pillar. And then they hated Christianity with a passion because Christianity stood in their way. The people who were Christians were saying what they were doing is wrong, so they hated Christianity with a passion. He believed that science and metaphysics were mutually exclusive, that you could not believe in science and Christianity at the same time, which is not true, and that the man was a bundle of physical needs. So the highest level of physical experience a man could experience is sex, and therefore sex was to be pursued at whatever cost, because it was the highest level of pleasure that man could experience. So based on those, they fought for the abolition of lifelong marriage. So monogamous marriage became an enemy because it meant you could only have one sex partner for life. They also talked about encouraging infants to experience sex, encourage them to touch themselves, encourage them to have sex with each other to know whether they are male or female, gay or lesbian. And they said that they would want to have sex education in schools so that children can be taught explicit sex. Then they said that abstinence is pathological, that if you could stay without sex, you're sick in the head, okay? And then they wanted freedom of people with abnormal sexuality. So they wanted the gays and lesbians to be given freedom to express themselves. And lastly, they wanted legalization of abortion. Now we are talking about 1950s. And these things have been written down, and somebody is actually running with it called William Reich. So the sexual revolution is funded by the sex industry, and I'll explain to you who those are. And then it has been exported to the rest of the world. So we are seeing it now is one of the fastest growing export commodity. A lady called Margaret Sanger in the US founded an organization called the International Planned Parenthood. And she got funding from the same industry and became a prominent crusader of sexual revolution. And she was also inspired by Marquis de Sage's philosophy. Now, she helped develop the contraceptive pill, and she helped legalize abortion in the US, okay? And in Hollywood, this thing was taken up, and we had themes that would encourage the sexual revolution themes put in movies, put in cartoon structures, and all those things that you see. So I used to watch James Bond movies. Some of you may be too old to know about James Bond, too young, isn't it? But James Bond was a nice guy. He was a British spy, and he was able to crack most of his cases. But James Bond also slept with every woman in the movie, including the enemies, isn't it? Yes? Now, when you watch a movie like that as a 16-year-old, 14-year-old, and this is a man who you look up to, he's a hero, he's done a good job, but his attitude towards women is very laissez-faire, it tends to speak to you, all right? We listened to songs like Shaggy. Shaggy sang a song and said, "It wasn't me." Yeah. He was caught doing this with somebody else's wife who's not his, and he said, "It wasn't me." And you sing and you dance. And this stuff talks to you. So depending on what you watch and what you listen to, your attitude can slowly be influenced without you understanding what is going on, okay? Then the key features of modern scientism were put into what the APPF developed that is called the comprehensive sexuality education. Now, how many of you have heard that term, comprehensive sexuality education? So not very many. Comprehensive sexuality education tells us children from the age of 5 are sexual, and we should teach them to touch themselves in their private parts to experience sexual pleasure. And then when they're about the age of 10, you allow them to have sex with boys and girls to know whether they are homosexual or not. And then, because some of them will get pregnant, you teach them to use contraceptives and make those contraceptives available to them. And the few who will get pregnant, and because pregnancy is a bad side effect of sex for pleasure, then you must provide them with abortion services. And that is supposed to be taught to our children from primary school. Okay? Now, the IPPF, together with WHO, were able to push this into the UN agenda. And unfortunately, the Structural Development Program and what are now called the SGDs actually have that language inside of them. The reproductive health and rights language that is already created there. And abortion, homosexuality, contraceptives were incorporated in the population control movement. Okay? So, according to the World Health Organization, the UNDP and UNFPA, every time you use the word sexual and reproductive health and rights, then you're saying that you must make access to abortion legal. And you remember our Constitution has a term called reproductive health. Now, we are also supposed to make sure that everybody is able to get pleasurable and safe sex experience, regardless of whether they are married or not. We are supposed to accept the diversity and sexual behavior of those expressing homosexuality and transgenderism. We are supposed to legalize prostitution. It is called sex work. Okay? So you're supposed to legalize prostitution. Then for those children who want to be transgender, then you can move them from boys to girls. You're allowed to have sex hormone and surgeries. And adolescents between the age of 10 and 18 are supposed to access contraceptives without parental guidance. And in November, there is going to be a conference in this country called the ICPD 25 that is supposed to make sure Kenya puts this together because we have signed some of those UN documents. Now, so when you talk about the sexual industry, which is really our enemy is not gays and lesbians. Our enemy is the sex industry. What you end up with is this elephant. You remember this story? There were 4 or 5 blind people who were told to touch an elephant, and each one of them described what it is they felt, isn't it? So the fellow who touched the trunk said an elephant is like a snake. The one who touched the leg says it is a tree stump. The other one who touched the ear said it's like a sheath of leather. The other one who touched the tail said it is like a mouse. Okay? And they were all describing the elephant. So this is what the sex industry looks like. Those of us who are fighting abortion are probably holding the trunk. There are those who are saying you have seen Illuminati penetrate Hollywood and all those things. You're probably just touching the ear. All right? Those who are dealing with the sexual and the LGBT movement are probably at the tail. All right? And all this huge animal is not seen to the unsuspecting eye. Okay? So let's see some of the things that they have been able to achieve. The sex industry includes anything that makes money from sex. So it includes human trafficking, it includes prostitution, it includes contraceptives, the sale of condoms, abortion, HIV drugs and STD drugs, anything that you can make money from sex. Now, according to the ILO report, in 2014, human trafficking was earning approximately 9.9 trillion Kenya shillings in a year. The Kenyan budget is 3 trillion. Human trafficking alone was generating 9.9 trillion shillings. The contraceptive industry was worth 1.6 trillion. The global condom market was worth 1.1 trillion. Then the sale of HIV drugs raised 610 billion. The abortion industry in the US alone raised 83 billion. The idea here is that the young people are the targets for these importations, okay? And the sooner you can start them into sex, the more commodities you can sell, okay? So the sex industry targets the young people, and what we call pornography and that comprehensive sexuality education is actually the marketing and recruiting arm of the sex industry. Every time you watch pornography, remember that those people are women who have been trafficked. They did not participate in any of that activity willingly. They are sex slaves, and every time you watch, more of them are needed so that to keep you giving you business. It is not just destructive to you as a person, but it supports income generation among this. When you watch that stuff and then you want to masturbate, then you want to have sex, then you want to do all these things, eventually you will consume more and more of their products. The earlier you have sex, the more likely you are to have an STD. The earlier you start, the more likely you have to have HIV. And they will make money from you at one point or another. Now, when you come to big pharmaceutical companies, Merck is the 7th largest company in the world. It has a revenue of 1 trillion Kenya shillings. So Merck makes more money than the country called Kenya. Bayer, the turnover is 4 trillion. You know, in 2018, they turned over 4 trillion Kenya shillings. Both of these companies produce contraceptives, and contraceptives used by teenagers are never used consistently, giving a false sense of security. So you get more STIs, more HIV, more of these things we have talked about, and you get pregnancies that were not planned for. And that then means that you need abortion. And Merck Sharp produces antibiotics, HIV, antiretroviral drugs. It's the one that produces the HPV vaccine we are supposed to give to our 10-year-old children. They produce the hepatitis B vaccine. Mifepristone is a drug that is used for terminating pregnancies. And they're the ones who produce this. So your morning after pills and all those things are being produced by people who want you to have sex early so that they can push their products. And you are the biggest consumer market potential, isn't it? Now, if we can also teach you comprehensive sexuality education and get you sexually excited from the age of 5, then they have an even bigger market. And Africa today has the largest number of young people in the world. All right? Is it starting to make sense? Why it is important to bring the agenda to our country? Okay? So that finishes that, and we can now look at the conditions that are called LGBT. Okay? So first, a general understanding. There is only male and female, there is no in between, regardless of what the censors asked you. Okay? You're either male or female. It is biological, it is for reproduction. It can't work any other way, okay? Sex is a biological construct. So your sex is not assigned, your sex is recognized. So when we deliver a baby, we don't show the mother the face of the child. We show the mother between the legs and say it's a boy, isn't it? She looks at your face later. Yeah? Yes? So it is recognized. It is not us who decide you're a boy or a girl, it is God-given, isn't it? And it is very important for you to know, to understand that word recognized, because it will become important. Then there is the intersex child. The intersex child is a very special child. In medicine, we call it a disorder of sex development. The intersex child has an incompletely formed male system or an incompletely formed female system, and when they are born and we look between the legs, we cannot say whether they are a boy or a girl. And sometimes we have to do tests, and even after the tests, even genetic tests, we still cannot know whether it's a boy or a girl. And that child must be watched carefully through counseling together with the parents, because by the time they become adolescent, by the time they become teenagers, and the secondary sexual characteristics developed, then you can be able to tell whether they are boys or girls. So you may raise a child a girl, and when they become a teenager, they actually become a boy. So they grow big shoulders and they start growing a beard. And you may bring up a child thinking it's a girl, and by the time they are a teenager, they start getting periods. Okay? Now, these children need to be transitioned. You can imagine if this happened to you in a boarding school. You are in a boys' boarding school, and you start getting periods. Now we know you are a girl, we need to transition you, isn't it? To move you to a girl's school and then now have your names changed and all those things. Because of that, the intersex child becomes another toy for the LGBTQ community, because by attaching that child to themselves, then the transgender person has a legal mandate to try and change their name and their sex. Do you see the trick now? So instead of saying male, female, or others, you say you want to count the intersex child, but when you put it in the question, you say male, female, and others. Instead of asking whether they're intersex, you ask others. So the transgender, the homosexuals, and everybody put in their names there. And that's why we were fighting that thing in the census. So gender is a range of characteristics that is assigned by the society. So gender keeps changing with every society. All right? So if you go to the Luo today and you ask them, who is a man? They say you must have your 6 teeth pulled out, isn't it? And if you go to a Kikuyu and you ask who is a man, you say he must be circumcised by removing the foreskin. Okay? So the Luo and the Kikuyu will never agree on the gender description of a man. Are we together? So gender keeps changing with every society, and that's why you cannot standardize it. It is not a good thing to follow because it will keep changing. We would rather work with sex. Okay? There is a condition called gender dysphoria. It's a medical illness where there is somebody who feels that their emotion and psychological identity as a male or female is opposite to what they have as the biological sex. So there are people who say, I feel like a woman trapped in a man's body, okay? And in medicine, that used to be an illness. It was a mental illness. It was a mental condition. But today, the American Psychiatric Society has removed it. It is no longer a mental illness. And in fact, they are considering putting what is called homophobia as a mental illness. Okay? So very soon it is you who will be mad, not the other way around. Now, when you go to the LGBT community, now remember we are now looking at a different society, all right? They come up with a term that is called gender identity. And they say it's a person's sense of own gender, okay? Gender identity can correlate with the assigned sex at birth or differ from it. So when they describe gender identity, what we were calling gender dysphoria and calling it an illness, now they are saying is normal, isn't it? And if you look at the term I've underlined here, they say what you are assigned at birth. Now you remember we said we don't assign sex at birth. What do? We recognize it. So you are a boy. If you're confused about whether you are male or female, you go to a mirror and you strip naked and you look. Ideally, you should be able to know who you are, isn't it? Yeah, so they say it is possible to be male physically, biologically, but you're female mentally, okay? The other term that they use is called sexual orientation. It is about who you are attracted to and who you feel drawn to romantically, emotionally, and sexually. Now, when the LGBT community comes into church, they come and they tell us that homosexuality is an attraction, okay? Now, if I am attracted to someone, but not erotically, then I have not committed sin. True? Are we together? So if I see Percy here and she looks nice, and I'm married, and I appreciate the fact that she looks nice, then I can say she looks nice. True? That is not sin, isn't it? But I can look at her and say, gay. Now I have broken the rule. Are we together? So if in the definition it is not just being attracted, it is also romantically and emotionally, meaning that I look at a person of my own sex, and I feel I would like to have sex with them, then that is sin. Are we together? So once it becomes lustful, then it is sin. Now, I can be attracted to Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, isn't it? And I look at him and I say, even me, I'd like to be a president like that guy. He looks nice and everything, isn't it? That's not a problem, isn't it? But if I look at him and I start saying, hey, Mazen, yeah? then there is a problem. So you would find you have to be very, very, very careful. So let us look at what they say. A lesbian is a woman who's attracted only to women. Then they say gay is men that are only attracted to men, but it can also be used to describe homosexual men or women. Then they say there is bisexual. So you remember it is LGBT, all of you know up to Q. There is another Q, there is the I we have removed for the intersex child, there is a double A, there is a P, and that is still not all of them. They keep growing. They're about 49 now, the last time I checked, so I don't know how many other genders there are. Okay? Now, a transgender is a person who is in transition from the opposite sex, and for you who has the same sex and you recognize your body as the same sex, then they call you cisgender. So transgender is male who thinks is female, and you, because you believe you're male and you look male, then you're cisgender. That's the term they use for you. A queer is a person who does not want to be labeled as lesbian, so they call themselves queer. Okay? Then you have the other Q is questioning. Someone that is questioning their sexual orientation is still unsure of his gender and what he's attracted to. The intersex we have described, but the reason I put it here is because their understanding is very different. They say biological variation in the sex characteristics that don't fit the typical male or female category is a very misleading statement because it assumes that the intersex child is a normal biological presence. Okay? There is something wrong with the way the sexual organs and the genes and everything of that child developed. And that child is not making a choice, okay? And if you leave them up to teenagehood, then they become male or female. So the intersex condition is not permanent, okay? Now, there are those guys who are sexual, a person that isn't sexually attracted to either gender, so him is a sexual. And then there are allies. Those are straight persons, so if you are not gay, you're not lesbian, you're not anything, but you support their cause, then you're an ally. And then there is a pansexual, a person that is attracted to a person because of their personality, okay? They do not care what gender they date or whatever is inside, and it will keep growing. So one of these days I'll come here to make a presentation, and I'll sit like this. Now, from now on, you address me as a tree. I am now a tree. There is a gentleman called Sigmund Freud who changed a lot of things about our understanding of psychology. And one of the most important statements he said is that childhood events have a great influence on our adult lives. They shape our personalities. So what we experience as children shapes our personality. And anxiety originating from traumatic experiences in the person's past can be hidden from the conscience. You could be doing things today not knowing that you're doing that because of something you experienced in your childhood. And this statement is very important because what these hidden things come out as in adults is they come out as mental illness. So you could be a child who was abused by your father, and you are 2 years, 3 years old, and you suffered a lot of pain and suffering, and you hid that at the back of your mind. Today you have homosexual attractions, and you do not know why. But if somebody walked with you, you would actually discover that there was something that went wrong. So childhood experiences, parents who divorce and you're left not having a parent, can lead to a lot of emotional and mental instability. But the thing about Sigmund Freud is that he was an atheist. And he described the belief in God as a collective neurosis, meaning it's a mental illness of people who are longing for a father. So Sigmund Freud did not believe in God. The father of medicine believed in God. The father of psychiatry believed in God. Psychology came in, and Sigmund Freud comes in, and now God is not a factor when you're addressing mental illness and other things. And that is part of the divide that you will find. So there will be doctors who are psychiatrists who will defend the LGBTQ conditions as normal, and there are doctors who believe in God who will say it is not normal. And that divide exists up to today. Okay? So the line between the LGBT thing and mental illness is very thin. Mental illness is described as a condition which causes serious disorders in a person's behavior or thinking. A disorder is a state of confusion or disruption of a systemic functioning and neat nature. So basically, if you are confused about your attraction or you're confused about who you are, then you are experiencing a mild mental condition, isn't it? So that's what LGBT is. Now, if the disorder or attraction is then played out, then we are now talking about sin, okay? So this I told you about, so. Now, I want us to focus on something before we move, that immorality, which is our inability to make good choices, actually is contributing to LGBT, okay? So if I consistently lack the capacity to make a good decision, then I am spiritually sick. That's what spiritual illness is. I can't listen to my conscience. I will not obey even when I have been asked and advised to do the right thing. If I consistently make the mistakes, then I am spiritually sick. Now, if I'm spiritually sick, I can hurt others by my action. So we have parents here today who have taken their children for drug rehabilitation therapy, isn't it? Because my son is abusing drugs, he's abusing alcohol, he's doing all these things, and the child is under the best care and you're spending a lot of money. But the problem is that you as a father are having a relationship with somebody else and your son knows about it. And he's looking at you and he knows his mother is hurting, but he can't do anything about it because he cannot challenge you. And what he does is he takes alcohol and he takes drugs to suppress his suffering. And all you do is take him to a rehabilitation center, while actually it is you who is sick. Are we together? That spiritual illness in the parent actually contributes to emotional damage to the children, and the children express it as mental illness, okay? These wounds we carry with us, the emotional wounds will hurt us, so it could be abuse that is physical, it could be emotional, it could be sexual, or it could just be abandonment. My father left me when I was a small child, I don't even know my mother, and I think the world hates me, and therefore I'm not useful, okay? Now, all these psychological problems then end up with children being hurt. So psychological wounds in people who don't acknowledge them then and seek healing then causes them to hurt others, okay? So if you abuse as a child and you grow up without addressing it, you're likely to abuse your own children or your own spouse, okay? So in conclusion, the sexual and reproductive health and rights is an ideology, it's actually a doctrine. It is the modern day sexual revolution. It is a deviant, it is anti-theist, it is against God, it is a subculture that is the opposite of what Christians believe. You therefore cannot be a Christian and support the LGBTQ agenda, okay? Now the sex industry has hijacked the illness, the mental illness of people who are having attraction disorders and commercialized it and made it a profiteering industry. And the Church of Christ is the only thing that stands between the sexual industry and its money. And that is why you become an enemy. And if they can't beat you directly, then they'll infiltrate you and send somebody who comes in and becomes a pastor and then tells us tomorrow after ordination that he's gay. All right? Now, if we don't take care of spiritual illness, then we'll keep generating more and more people with LGBTQ ideologies, okay? So remember, we live in the world, but we are not. We are not of the world, okay? So we now go to the solutions. At the Kenya Christian Professional Forums, then we have started a campaign we are calling the Drawing a Line campaign. We are saying that if you are to win any battle, you must be able to identify your enemy. Who is our enemy in this case? Is it the person who is confused about their gender and orientation? Who is our enemy? It's the sex industry, yeah? Now, this is what our Lord told us in Matthew 10:34 to 39, but I want us to focus on 37. He says, anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And anyone who does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. But at the beginning, at 34, he says, do not assume I have come to bring peace on earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. What we are being told by our Lord is that the divide between us and the world must be very clear. You cannot dare to have it gray. The minute it is gray, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. You must know who you are and what you believe and be ready to defend it, okay? So we are drawing a line between the kingdom of God established by Christ and the world. Matthew 10:34 to 39 is basically what we have just looked at. We are drawing a line between the wheat and the tare. And this would determine for us who is the ministry and who is in the mission field, isn't it? The missionary and the mission field. So Christ planted wheat. Somebody came in the darkness and planted wheat tare, isn't it? And we are to grow together. Eventually, at the day of judgment, we shall be separated. But every time you speak to someone, it's important you ask them whether they are Christian so that you know whether they are missionaries like you or the mission field, isn't it? That you are to take the good news to them. We're also going to draw a line between what we are calling the good fish and the bad fish. You remember that parable? You remember the parable of the good fish and the bad fish? Somebody cast a net and dragged it out, and the fishermen took the good fish and threw away the bad fish. Yes? There are those of us who are Christians because of their parents' conviction. And there are those of us who are Christians because of personal conviction. Which are you? Were you just caught in the net? Or do you have personal conviction? We have sheep and goat, okay? Within the ministry, we have sheep and goat. There are those who obey perpetually and do what the shepherd says. There are those who do it sometimes, depending on convenience, isn't it? Ask your neighbor whether he's sheep or goat. Yes? Then we have sheep and wolf in sheep clothing, isn't it? So that we have enemies within the church. We have people who are misleading the flock who are with us, and we also must be alert to those. And then we are going to draw a line between the good steward and the bad steward. You remember the story of the talents? That each one of us has a talent and each one of us is expected to harvest souls for the Father. And that when he comes back, he will ask us what we did with our talents. It is not enough to receive Christ. It is very important that you spread the good news of our salvation, isn't it? So, when you are making your choices, which culture is guiding you? I am a Kikuyu, but I introduce myself as a Christian of Kikuyu extract. So I am first a Christian, then I am a Kikuyu, okay? But there are people who are Kikuyus who are Christians. And therefore their Kikuyu culture comes before Christ, isn't it? Now, some of you young people here have even been trained in sexual and reproductive health and rights, and you might not know it. You have been told that masturbation is normal and homosexuality is normal. You've been told don't judge. He is like that, accept him and let him be part of your crew. All that is culture that has been brought to you. And you must ask yourself, which culture is guiding you? So, there are three things you need to do with culture. When I was confused about my Kikuyuness and my Christianness, somebody taught me this. He said, look at what is in your culture or what you believe to be true that is inconsistent with your Christian faith. And if you find that it is not inconsistent, then that you can keep. So I name my children according to the Kikuyu culture because it is not offensive to the Christian faith. True? Then there are those things that are very good intentioned, but to practice them becomes a problem. So Kikuyus used to inherit wives, just like the Luos. Now, to inherit the wife and give the children a father figure and make sure the widow is taken care of is a good thing, isn't it? But then having sexual relationships with the widow then breaks the rules. So we inherit, but we don't have sexual relationships, isn't it? So you modify that culture, you keep what is not offensive to the faith, and you reject what is offensive. Then the Kikuyus were polygamous. So I could have had many wives if I didn't become a Christian, isn't it? So I reject that part of the practice because it is inconsistent with my Christian faith. It is the same thing you young people need to do, because half of you are not the culture you were born into. My child cannot claim to be a Kikuyu because I have not told them everything there was about the Kikuyus, isn't it? So you have a lot of belief systems. You need to go back and look at yourselves and ask whether what you believe is consistent with your faith. Can anybody tell me what is wrong with that picture? It is the life cycle of a chicken. And if you know the answer, don't tell me, because some of you know. Between the chicken and the egg, which came first? The chicken. So where did the egg it hatched from come from? Yeah? If the chicken came first, then where did the egg that hatched it come from? If the egg came first, then what gave the egg? Isn't this how we are taught the life cycle? The problem with this life cycle is that there is no cock, there is no male. There is no male, which means that that egg cannot be fertilized and it will never become a chick. True? This was designed specifically to allow us to believe in evolution. Because if you cannot explain what came first between the egg and the chicken, then you must believe that it was spontaneous, isn't it? But if you put a cock in there and you have a male and a female, then they must have been created and must have been present at the same time for an egg to be fertilized for the generations to come. And therefore evolution doesn't make sense. Okay? Tuko pamoja? Now, since you were not taught the life cycle of a human being, let me teach it to you as we conclude. In the beginning there was God, and God created the whole of the universe before he created you. Then he created man in his own image. And man had everything that was intended for a human being to have, but he was found to be lonely, isn't it? So God removed something from man and created the woman, so that the woman represents only half of human nature and the man represents the other half. And until they come together, they cannot reproduce. So you do not need a man in your life for you to become a president. You don't need a man in your life for you to become an engineer as a woman. And yes, it is true. And even for you men, you don't need women to become the president and an engineer. Isn't it? Yes. But you can never have children unless you take a spouse who is of the opposite sex. Okay? Now, we disobeyed God and broke our relationship with him, and he had to send Christ to come and restore our relationship. And from the point Christ came, then the human life cycle starts with marriage. When the two of you come together and vow before God that you will live together and raise your children in the knowledge of God. And it is in that we are supposed to get fruitfulness. The baby inside the mother does not belong to the mother. It is a temporary occupant of the uterus for 9 months and has to live and go and become an independent being. Then we give birth to the child. And why do we tolerate children? We tolerate children because they represent the future. You have to teach them how to walk. You have to change diapers. You have to teach them to speak. You have to teach them all these things until they become adults. Children are supposed to be brought in up in a unit called the family structure. It has a mother who you learn different things from. It has a father you learn different things from. 80% of what children learn is by observation, not by instruction. It's by seeing how you relate to one another. And it is the many families that then make the community, and it is from the community that we get the next couple, and the life cycle continues. And because we are spiritual and we know that there are some people who will die in the community, there are some souls that will be sent away from the Father, and some souls will go back to the Father. Are we together? Now, if you remove any part of that structure, you destroy the whole of the human race. If you allow John here to believe he can go into union with Kamau, that relationship is sterile and it is the end of the human race. You don't need an atomic bomb. If you say marriage is useless and we can live together for 3 years as we practice to decide whether we are getting married or not, then you're going to destroy human race. If you start saying the child in the mother's womb is her choice, and she can choose to terminate the pregnancy or not, then we destroy human life. We will have children who are dumped, who are thrown in dustbins, we'll have broken families, and eventually we have a disordered community. If you look at the whole of that picture, you'll understand it is all family. Everything is about the family for the humans. Our whole central system is a family. And the family structure must be protected even from LGBTQ and others, because the minute you destroy it, then you have destroyed the whole of humanity. Are we together? Our battle is very clear. We must defend the human life cycle, because if we don't, we are going to get into trouble. So what are we going to do with people who have attention, they have attraction or personality identity disorders? Remember, you are a sinner yourself who was forgiven, isn't it? So you do not have a holier than thou attitude. Then we rebuke in love. You are a creation of God. If you have somebody who's having these challenges, ask them, who are you? Because you cannot identify yourself with a sexual habit, isn't it? If I can say I'm a homosexual, then there is somebody who should come and say I'm a masturbator, isn't it? Yeah? And I'm a bestialitist, isn't it? You cannot be defined by your habit. You are a person created in the image of God with a purpose, and God loves you, and God would like to have a personal relationship with you. You cannot be a homosexual. You cannot define yourself with a state. Okay? So when your friend tells you they're having those challenges, and you go and tell your friend, but you do not counsel them, then you are gossip. Isn't it? It is you they have disclosed to who you must walk with. Eh? Now, remember that childhood events can sometimes be hidden from conscience, so that the person telling you they are attracted to people of the same sex is not joking. Do not tell them what they are feeling is wrong, because it is true and it is real in their heart. They just need to understand that it is disordered. Are we together? Yeah, you don't tell him what's wrong with you, because you do not know what they have gone through in the past. So we must treat them with mercy and compassion, and we must restore their dignity. Remember, dignity is God-given, and I can abuse my dignity, or you can abuse my dignity. We need to restore them to God, and therefore understand that those psychological problems they went through could be a major issue. Okay? So helping them through spiritual healing is one way of helping them to regain their dignity. We need to encourage them to forgive those who may have abused them or abandoned them or did whatever it is that triggered these feelings, so that they themselves can be forgiven. Once they have received Christ, then the thing is that there must be transformation. So you cannot come and tell me I am homosexual, I have accepted Christ, but I will remain a homosexual. Is that clear? There must be transformation, and we must see the fruit of the Holy Spirit, okay? Now, you must encourage restoration. Remember this in Matthew 18, 15 to 17, you are told how to handle a sinner, isn't it? Yes? If your brother sins against you, talk to him in private first. If he doesn't listen, come with a witness. If he doesn't listen, go and tell Pasi and come with a church, isn't it? And if he doesn't listen, you treat him as a pagan or a tax collector. And a pagan and a tax collector, you need to teach them faith from first principles, isn't it? Our faith has no place for giving up on the sinner. You do not eject them from the church. You explain to them that a God exists and a God who loves them. Remember that in Ezekiel we are told, if I send you to a wicked person, and you do not go and they die in their wickedness, then their blood will be held to your account. That you who I have come and disclosed to, if you do not do anything to help me and guide me out of this, and I die in that state of sin, then you shall be held to account. Okay? If you are sent to a backslider and you don't go, again their blood will be held to your account. And if you are sent to a community, again, that's the same thing. So Pasi from Meru, if he comes here and doesn't speak against wickedness, and we die in our wickedness, then he shall be held to account, isn't it? The thing I'd like you to do is expect persecution when you speak the truth. You shall be put on that cross like our Lord. Do you remember that lady who spoke the truth? 2 + 2 is 4, and she was actually sacked from her job because she was saying the truth, and the world would not listen to the truth. But also remember that if you die for the truth, if you stand for the truth, that you too shall be exalted, isn't it?